In the early morning hours on December 30th, 1916, in Petrograd, the once and former St. Petersburg, a body was tossed over the railing into an icy river. 2 days later, the corpse was retrieved from the frozen water and identified as Rasputin, the infamous mystic who had wielded uncanny influence over Russia's imperial family. News of Rasputin's violent demise sent shockwaves through wartime Russia. Amid the frenzy of gossip, one particularly provocative claim took hold: that the conspirators had been aided by agents of the British Empire. In this video, we'll analyze the evidence for and against British involvement, and you can draw your own conclusion about this scandalous Great War mystery. Rasputin's path to power was as unlikely as it was meteoric. Born a Siberian peasant in 1869, he reinvented himself as a wandering holy man and eventually made his way to the Romanov imperial court in 1905. Emperor Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra, who believed Rasputin could heal their hemophiliac son Alexei, were deeply impressed by the wild mystic. Despite his low-born status and unusual characteristics, they soon came to rely on him heavily. He wasn't just a healer for the ailing heir, he had also become their confidant and personal friend. By the 1910s, Rasputin had gained considerable clout within the palace. However, he was also an extremely divisive figure, and many in high society viewed Rasputin as a dangerous charlatan who bewitched the royal couple. Tales spread of his drunkenness, womanizing, and meddling in state affairs. He was accused of being a debauched charlatan who bent the will of the Tsar and Tsarina to his own ends. Simply put, many in the Russian imperial court believed that a simple Siberian peasant had, in effect, become the most powerful person in Russia, a fact that shocked and appalled them. When World War I broke out in 1914, Rasputin's influence became intertwined with Russia's fate in the war. As the conflict dragged on and Russian casualties mounted, the populace grew frustrated and looked for someone to blame. Rasputin, a convenient scapegoat at the heart of power, was soon accused of every imaginable treachery. In some circles, he was branded a traitor and even suspected of being a secret agent of the Germans, sabotaging Russia's war effort from within. By late 1916, there had already been multiple plots against his life, and a sense of urgency was building among his enemies that Rasputin must be stopped at any cost. Rasputin's controversial role didn't only alarm Russians, it also troubled Russia's allies, Britain foremost among them. By 1916, rumors swirled that Rasputin was urging the Tsar to consider a separate peace with Germany, a prospect that horrified London. If Russia pulled out of World War I, the Germans could redeploy dozens of divisions from the Eastern Front to fight the British and French in the West. This could have potentially tipped the balance of the entire war in favor of the Central Powers. British intelligence reports from Petrograd that year voiced grave concern about Rasputin's influence. Not only was he seen as displacing pro-British ministers in the Russian government, but, most dangerously, he seemed to be insisting on the withdrawal of Russian troops from the war. Whether Rasputin truly advocated a separate peace out of pacifism or was simply mischaracterized, British officials perceived him as a very real threat to the Allied cause. Late on the night of December 29, 1916, Prince Yusupov lured Rasputin to his palace on the Moika River under the pretense of a small party. Since this isn't the story of what really happened to Rasputin, that's a tale for another video, let's just say that the precise details of Rasputin's end are equal parts murky and violent. That said, an autopsy later confirmed that Rasputin sustained 3 gunshot wounds from 2 different firearms. The final fatal shot was a bullet to his forehead fired at very close range. With Rasputin dead, the aristocratic plotters rolled his body in a carpet, drove to a nearby bridge, and tipped the corpse into the frozen river. They had hoped the water would carry away both Rasputin and any incriminating evidence. However, as we know, Rasputin's body was soon found, and the news of his dramatic assassination spread quickly. Amid the plotters that night lurks the shadow of international intrigue and the tantalizing possibility that British secret agents were involved, either in an official capacity or not. The key figure in this theory is Oswald Rayner, an MI6 officer stationed in Petrograd who happened to be a close personal friend of Prince Yusupov. Years before, Rayner had met Yusupov at Oxford University, and when Rayner was posted to Russia in late 1915, he naturally reconnected with his old university friend. The two spent a great deal of time together during 1916, and it appears Rayner was well aware of Yusupov's growing conspiracy against Rasputin. In his memoirs, Yusupov even admits he confided in Rayner about the planned assassination. Yusupov noted that on the night of the killing, after Rasputin lay dead, Rayner visited Yusupov's palace to hear what had happened. By that account, Rayner arrived only after the deed was done. However, the presence of a British agent so intimately connected to the lead assassin certainly raised suspicions. Vladimir Purishkevich, one of the conspirators, had tipped off Britain's intelligence chief in Russia in early December that a group of young officers was planning to eliminate Rasputin. In other words, British intelligence knew the assassination was brewing and did nothing to dissuade it. Perhaps the most intriguing piece of evidence is a contemporaneous letter from Captain Stephen Alley, a British officer in Petrograd, to John Scale, an MI6 agent. In this note, Alley writes cryptically, quote, "Although matters here have not proceeded entirely to plan, our objective has clearly been achieved. Reaction to the demise of dark forces has been well received, although a few awkward questions have already been asked about wider involvement. Rayner is attending to loose ends and will no doubt brief you on your return." Rasputin was often vilified as the dark force corrupting Russia, so it appears the British agents were jubilant that their objective had been met. If this document is genuine, it constitutes perhaps the strongest indication that British intelligence had a hand in the plot. Exactly what the loose ends were is left to our imagination, but the implication is that Rayner was directly involved in the operation and cleanup. Given that this letter was allegedly written a couple weeks after the event, some scholars have suggested that loose ends may have been finding the body, which clearly wasn't to plan. But this letter isn't the only evidence of British involvement, and the rabbit hole goes much deeper. One key piece of evidence comes from the forensic examination of Rasputin's body. Autopsy reports noted that the 3 bullet wounds on Rasputin came from different caliber weapons. 2 wounds could be attributed to the handguns that Yusupov and Purishkevich were known to carry. But the 3rd wound, the one that struck Rasputin's forehead and killed him, was peculiar. Forensic experts determined that this fatal shot was fired at point-blank range and left markings consistent with a lead non-jacketed bullet. This was the type used in a revolver, not an automatic pistol that Yusupov and Purishkevich were known to be carrying based upon Yusupov's later writings. This led some analysts to conclude that the headshot was delivered by a Webley revolver, a sidearm standard for British officers in World War I. Notably, this weapon was known to be preferred by Oswald Rayner. This ballistic clue suggests that a British-supplied gun, and by extension possibly a British gunman, fired the fatal blow that night. Notably, some believe that this forensic evidence may have been the loose end that Rayner was supposed to be cleaning up. Circumstantial evidence from those involved further intertwines Rayner with the deed. After the war, Oswald Rayner reportedly confided to friends and family that he had indeed been present during Rasputin's final moments. According to one account, upon returning to England, Rayner even showed a cousin a bullet, which he claimed to have taken from the crime scene as a souvenir. Such an admission, if true, implies that Rayner was not merely an observer after the fact, but directly witnessed, and perhaps participated in, Rasputin's demise. Moreover, Rayner played a strikingly prominent role in shaping the public story of the slaying as we understand it today. In 1927, he assisted Prince Yusupov in translating and publishing Yusupov's memoir, which recounted the night of the assassination. There's also been suggestions that he may have had an editorial hand in the Russian edition as well. Rayner maintained close ties with Yusupov long after 1916, and even named his son after the man. To add a further layer of mystery, when Rayner found out he was dying, he decided to burn all his memoirs and papers. For all the tantalizing evidence, a number of historians urge caution, noting that no conclusive proof of British involvement has ever been found. The British government has never officially acknowledged any role in Rasputin's demise. Crucially, the known archives of MI6 contain no documentation related to any such operation. The notorious letter from Alley to Scale, for example, was discovered only decades later, and its authenticity, while widely accepted by researchers, cannot be verified beyond doubt. Skeptics suggest that even if the letter is real, it might reflect British approval of Rasputin's demise after the fact, rather than proof of a premeditated British plan or physical participation. Further, it's also worth noting that British Ambassador George Buchanan took an extraordinary step. He personally assured Tsar Nicholas that Britain had nothing to do with Rasputin's slaying, stressing that such an assassination was abhorrent to the British people. And it's somewhat interesting because some view this act as further proof that Britain was actually involved, while others view it as proof of the opposite. Another intriguing theory is that Oswald Rayner was involved, but without official British government backing. Under this theory, Rayner linked up with his old friend, and essentially went rogue, acting out of loyalty to his friend, or out of a personal belief as to the dangers of Rasputin. Thus, the letter stating that things haven't gone to plan may be referring to the fact that a British agent had directly inserted himself into the events. At the end of the day, there'll likely never be absolute proof in this case, but there's enough evidence here for you, the viewer, to make an informed decision. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Just reminding you to check out my other channel, Lazy Chill Zone, for contemporary mysteries of all kinds. Also remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Roland Garros became one of the first true aviation legends in France and the entire world. Despite his status as one of the first elite fighter pilots in World War I, the circumstances surrounding the downing of his plane remain a mystery a century later. Born October 6, 1888, on the island of Reunion, he showed an early passion for adventure and technology. As a teenager, he survived a severe bout of pneumonia that left him with fragile health, but it also spurred his interest in sports and endurance, and he took up cycling to rebuild his strength. Garros eventually moved to Paris for schooling, attending a prestigious business school, and even started a successful automobile dealership in the city. His life changed forever in the summer of 1909 when he attended an air show in Champagne. Mesmerized by the spectacle of early flying machines, the 21-year-old Garros decided on the spot to become an aviator. He purchased an airplane and taught himself to fly, earning his pilot's license by 1910. In the years before World War I, Roland Garros quickly built a reputation as one of France's most daring and accomplished pilots. He set altitude records in 1911 and 1912, pushing his fragile aircraft to new heights of nearly 13,000 and then almost 20,000 feet. He became a star attraction at aviation meets and air races, astonishing crowds with aerobatic displays. Garros's most famous pre-war feat came in 1913, when he became the first person to fly non-stop across the Mediterranean Sea. On September 23, 1913, he took off from the south of France and landed in Tunisia after nearly 8 hours in the air, nursing 2 engine malfunctions along the way. By the eve of the Great War, he was not only a celebrated aviator, but also an embodiment of the new technological heroism of the age. When World War I broke out in August 1914, Garros immediately volunteered for military service and initially flew reconnaissance missions. Early in the war, battlefield rumors and press reports already began to mythologize him, with stories of his heroic deeds being widely reported. In 1914 and into 1915, air combat was still in its infancy. Pilots generally carried rifles or pistols, but aiming a gun while flying a moving airplane was extraordinarily difficult. Garros, ever inventive, tackled one of the key challenges of turning airplanes into true fighters. He figured out how to fire a machine gun forward through the airplane's propeller arc without destroying the propeller. Working with notable early aircraft designer Raymond Saulnier, Garros helped devise a crude but ingenious solution. They attached steel deflector wedges to the back of the wooden propeller blades of his monoplane. These wedge-shaped metal plates would hopefully deflect any bullets that struck the propeller, allowing a machine gun to shoot straight ahead. It was not a perfect system. Bullets could still shatter or ricochet, but Garros believed fewer than 10% of shots would hit the prop, and the risk was worth the reward in combat. With a light machine gun mounted behind his engine, synchronized only by the deflector plates, he achieved the world's first air-to-air victories by a forward-firing machine gun. On April 1, 1915, Garros shot down a German aircraft by firing through his spinning propeller, a feat previously thought impossible to complete safely. In the next 2 weeks, he brought down 2 more German planes, achieving 3 victories by April 18th. French newspapers lionized him as a new kind of war hero. An American newspaper even dubbed him an ace after one especially successful bout, helping to popularize the term for pilots with 5 or more aerial victories. And as a quick aside, by this definition, he would technically never officially be an ace, but stay tuned to find out why. Garros had effectively created the first makeshift fighter plane, and the impact on aerial warfare was immediate. However, this pioneering success would soon lead to both triumph and tragedy for Garros. Roland's luck ran out on April 18, 1915, the day of what he had hoped would be his 4th aerial victory. Accounts vary as to exactly what went wrong. Some sources say a German anti-aircraft cannon shell struck his plane, damaging it and clogging the fuel line. Others suggest engine trouble alone forced him down. In either case, Garros had to make an emergency landing behind German lines. He came down in a field in enemy-held territory and was quickly seized by German troops before he could destroy his aircraft. The intact machine gun and propeller with its bullet deflectors were captured along with the French airmen. This was a grave development for the Allies. Garros's secret invention was now in German hands. The deflector system was shown to the Dutch aircraft engineer Anthony Fokker, who had been working for the Germans. Fokker famously reverse-engineered the concept into a more elegant solution, an interrupter gear that synchronized machine gun fire with the propeller's rotation. Within months, new Eindecker fighters outfitted with interrupter gears dominated the skies, ushering in the so-called Fokker Scourge that gave Germany air superiority later in 1915. Ironically, the heroism and innovation of Roland Garros had been turned against his own side, a twist not lost on the public. The Germans held Garros as a prisoner of war for nearly 3 years. He was shuttled between POW camps in places like Mainz and tried repeatedly to escape captivity, only enhancing his reputation back at home. Each attempt failed until finally, in February 1918, Garros succeeded in a daring breakout. Along with a fellow French airman, the two managed to slip away from their captors dressed up as German officers. The two escapees traversed the Dutch frontier to reach neutral territory, eventually making their way to London and then back to Paris. By the time Garros returned home in the spring of 1918, he was a very different man from the exuberant youth who had set altitude records. Imprisonment had taken a toll on his health. He had lost weight and suffered from deteriorating eyesight. Friends and officials urged him to retire from combat. Even French Premier Georges Clemenceau wanted Garros to serve in a safer advisory role. But the aviator's indomitable spirit had not dimmed, and Roland, much like his Frankish namesake, couldn't be kept away from the battlefield. In the fall of 1918, with World War I in its final desperate phase, Garros rejoined his old unit. He had to retrain on newer, faster planes and modern tactics. The era of gentlemanly solo duels in the sky had given way to massed formations and coordinated squadrons. In a testament to his skill and tenacity, he managed to score at least one more aerial victory. On October 2nd, 1918, just weeks after returning to action, Garros shot down a German Fokker D-7, one of Germany's best fighter planes, giving him a fourth confirmed victory. This would be his final triumph. It also brought him tantalizingly close to the coveted ace status, defined as 5 victories, a fact surely not lost on him. According to accounts, he was eager to keep flying and continue proving himself in those closing days of the war. On October 5th, 1918, Garros took off on what would be his last mission. The Allied forces were on the offensive, and the Western Front skies over the Ardennes region were contested by German fighters making a desperate stand. Details of Garros's final flight have to be pieced together from sparse records and later testimony. What is known is that he was flying a patrol near Vouziers in the Ardennes on that day. Sometime during the morning, he encountered German aircraft, and a dogfight ensued. French witnesses later recounted that an air battle took place high above the lines. During this engagement, tragedy struck. Garros's plane was seen spiraling down out of control, and one report even states that his plane exploded in midair during the fight. The wreckage crashed to earth near the village of Saint-Maurel, not far from Vouziers. When his comrades reached the crash site, they found that Garros was KIA, just a day shy of his 30th birthday, and barely 5 weeks before the armistice that ended the war. The French pilot who had returned against all odds wouldn't live to see the victory he fought for. The question of who exactly shot down Roland Garros has intrigued historians and aviation enthusiasts for decades. Mysteriously, at the time of the combat, no German fighter pilot filed an official claim for downing Garros's aircraft. In the World War I air war, it was customary for pilots to submit victory claims when they believed they had destroyed an enemy plane. The absence of any such claim on October 5, 1918, initially shrouded Garros's death in uncertainty. This lack of an immediate known victor led to various theories. One possibility was that Garros had fallen victim to ground-based fire. The German army's flak cannons had been active in the area and had proven deadly to many pilots. Given that Garros had been forced down by anti-aircraft fire once before in 1915, it was conceivable that German gunners on the ground might have struck the fatal blow. Another theory was that Garros could have suffered a mechanical failure or a mid-air explosion unrelated to enemy fire, though the intensity of the dogfight makes this less likely. Modern research into World War I aviation has since shed more light on the likely cause of Garros's death. By cross-referencing Allied loss records with German combat reports, historians have identified a strong candidate for the man who shot down Garros. This was German ace Hermann Habich, who was credited with an aerial victory on the same day and in the same region. The timing and location roughly matched the encounter that cost this legendary French aviator his life. In other words, while no one at the time announced the victory, the archival evidence strongly suggests Habich was the victorious German pilot in that final dogfight. It appears that Garros, flying despite his waning health and at older age by fighter pilot standards, was outmatched by a younger opponent in one of Germany's best aircraft. Today there's no overwhelming historical consensus on how Garros was ultimately brought down. However, historians are generally of the view that Hermann Habich was the man responsible. Some have speculated that had the victory come earlier in the Great War, this would have been hailed as a massive propaganda victory by Imperial Germany. However, it was the end of 1918, and war exhaustion had become overwhelming. Garros died a national hero, and France and the aviation world mourned the loss of one of its pioneering sons. In his short life of 29 years, Garros had pushed the boundaries of flight and shown extraordinary courage both in innovation and in battle. Though he scored just 4 confirmed victories, Garros's contributions to aerial warfare were far out of proportion to the length of his combat service. He's remembered not for a tally of victories, but for being the first to arm an airplane with a forward-firing machine gun, effectively co-inventing the fighter plane. That is to say, every fighter aircraft that followed owed something to his ingenuity. His name also lives on in unexpected ways. 10 years after the war, in 1928, a new tennis stadium in Paris was named in his honor. Today, the French Open Grand Slam tournament is played in the stadium named after him and is also named in his honor as well. This has ensured the aviator's name is spoken by millions upon millions of people around the world each year, even if most will never know its origin.